Hi, I'm James.
And I'm Antony.
And this is Words and Numbers. Brought to you by the good people at CACI, the Center for American Culture and Ideas. Ant, what's new and exciting in your world this week?
Well, I have several things.
Of course you do. Do you have three?
I do actually have three.
All right. What do you figure the odds that I will be at all interested in two of them?
Oh, you'll be interested in two of them.
Okay, let's see.
The first one, you probably won't be interested in. I don't know. University of Tokyo Center for Artificial Intelligence has designed an AI to help alleviate the emotional burnout of call center employees. Well, it's kind of interesting. Of course, call center employees get all the brunt of irate customers calling in and complaining and calling them names and the whole thing. And apparently, emotional burnout and I don't know, seeing psychologists, whatever it is, this is a big deal for people who work in call centers. But what's happened is University of Tokyo has created this AI that sits between the caller and the person who works the call center. And the AI is trained when it hears the person becoming irate and saying all kinds of horrible things to insert itself and to rephrase in some nice, polite language. So the person who is answering the phone, the call center employee, is hearing the AI, not hearing the person who's ranting at the other end of the phone.
This is a terrible idea. Part of language, indeed probably the lion's share of language, is about conveying a mood.
Yeah, well, you're just mad because you have one mood and it's pissed off, and this AI is going to get in your way of telling people off.
Well, here's my prediction. AI will indeed alleviate the mental concerns of call center employees by ultimately replacing all of them.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
On to number two.
Number two, you may have received also, a couple of packages from one of our listeners, Van Brown. Van Brown is president of Brown Ox Ventures, which produces the bull snot line of products, car and truck care products, wax, glass cleaner, tire conditioner, detail cleaner, all the kinds of things you need to make your car or truck look wonderful. He contacted me and said, hey, I'm a longtime listener. I'm going to send you a t-shirt. So in comes one box. It's got a t-shirt, some hats in it, quite nice. And then comes another box.
A much heavier box.
Filled with all of this stuff. It gets here and I'm looking through it, all these interesting things. And my son, who's in his early 20s and just bought himself a new/used car, wanders by and starts eyeing the products. And of course, the next day, half of them are gone.
Yeah, that sounds right. I'm waiting for my 20-year-old son to find them as well.
So, Van, thank you very much for the package.
Indeed, thank you. When he said, I'll send you a t-shirt, I didn't expect to get 50 pounds worth of stuff.
Yeah.
The best part of my day is getting the mail. I love getting the mail. And when things like this show up, I'm just over them. This was just the best.
If anyone wants to check out his products, there's a link to Brown Ox Ventures in the show notes. So check it out.
This is an unpaid endorsement.
Or just Google bull snot. I'm pretty sure this is the only thing that's going to come up.
All right, so you're 1 for 2. What's number 3? What's the deciding item?
The last one is I want to give a belated birthday shout out to Benjamin Norris, a longtime listener who turned 13 recently. Benjamin not only listens to Words and Numbers every week, he has read Cooperation and Coercion, quote, several times.
13?
13 years old.
How about that?
Benjamin, we are delighted we can offer you something to think about each week and only wish that more young people, and older for that matter, were as interested in these topics as you are. Best wishes for a productive year.
You should probably turn away and not listen to the next segment because it's probably inappropriate for a 13-year-old, as is almost every other thing out of my mouth. But I was reading the Free Press, something I don't do very often, and something I don't trust all that much. So with that as segue, I guess we'll call it, the article written by one Kat Rosenfield talks about how middle-class women have taken to using mushrooms in greater number all of a sudden. Now, this gets into the microdosing element where people who have various mental conditions will do a microdose of a hallucinogenic mushroom, and there's a lot of data to indicate that this really helps quite a lot. But that's not exactly what she's getting at here. These women are doing it to get high, and they're doing it quite a lot. And, to see something like this in the almost mainstream press is kind of interesting. Denver has decriminalized mushrooms, and they're going to be available over the counter, I believe, early 2025. So the same way we saw the worm turn with marijuana, we're seeing it turn, I think, with mushrooms.
And you said this is becoming popular amongst, did you say middle age or middle class women?
Well, both, actually.
Both, yeah.
Not exactly the group of people you first think of when you think mushrooms.
Right.
And yet here we are. I just think that's absolutely fascinating. People have become more open about their use of these, right? It's not in the shadows anymore. Regular people use mushrooms and then talk about it.
You predicted this a long time ago, long before marijuana became legal amongst the states. Maybe it was a time when one of the first, there were like one or two states that moved first. I recall you saying that once marijuana legalization catches on across the country, it's going to open the floodgates and you're going to see all kinds of other things among the mushrooms.
And mushrooms are very clearly next. And frankly, I can't wait. I love mushrooms. Love them. Happy to admit this. When I worked in Iraq, every time I would come or go, I had to stop off in Amsterdam for a brief while, and you could buy mushrooms in Amsterdam. Newsflash, that whole city didn't disappear into a vortex of destruction,
right,
because of the mushrooms available there or any of the other things available. Although, in fairness, citizens of Amsterdam would prefer, I think, that these things not be for sale there, because it just brings all kinds of tourists in that they would rather not have to deal with. Take that however you would want. But, when they're available and you want to try them, you do. Then you find out it's not that big a deal. It's actually quite pleasant. And I'd go to Denver to spend a weekend. That'd be great. Would you like to go to Denver with me and we could do live words and numbers as we hit the mushrooms?
Live from the mushrooms? No.
We should do that. Ladies and gentlemen in the great beyond, send Antony email. He loves email. Encourage him to do this. This would be hilarious. That, of course, brings us to the foolishness of the week. And God, man, at the risk of becoming a one-note chord, Donald Trump wins again.
This happened when he ran in 2020. I swear he was foolishness of the week for like 4 or 5 weeks straight.
Every week it's something else. I want you to ask yourself, what would the national press and the electorate say if Kamala Harris talked about how big Arnold Palmer's was? I'm guessing they'd ask a question or two. With Donald Trump, doesn't even break the surface of the water. But this happened in the bordering town where you and I used to live, Latrobe, Pennsylvania, where Arnold Palmer is from, as was Mr. Rogers. So a nice bit of history. I met Arnold Palmer at his club, the golf club. Arnie used to walk around inside his club, glad-handing people and what have you, swearing like a sailor.
Really?
His language made mine seem like an 8-year-old's.
That's quite a feat.
It was so bad that one night I saw a group of little old ladies get up and leave, at which point Arnie launched on them, telling them what they could do to themselves as they walked out the door. But Donald Trump decided that he was going to talk about Arnold Palmer's Good God, what's wrong with him?
Well, yeah, but I have to say, I think we've come to expect it from Donald. This is just what he does.
And that's why it's not being covered, except for here, because that, my friend, is the foolishness of the week.
For one-stop shopping for all things James and Ant, visit our website, wordsandnumbers.org. We give a special shout-out to our Patreon sponsors who help us keep the lights on. If you'd like to contribute, go to patreon.com/wordsandnumbers. A couple of weeks ago, we talked about falling crime rate and got a bunch of responses from listeners saying that the FBI has updated their crime data and that crime was not down but up.
Hold the phone. What we got was a bunch of hate mail.
It wasn't hate mail. It was quite polite.
It was a bunch of people calling me an idiot because I was dumb enough to... You shut your mouth right now. There were two things they complained about. There were more than two things, but there were two things in common that they complained about. First, that I believed the FBI when the FBI reported crime data, and that I was dumb enough to put a link to an NPR story, because NPR, of course, can't be trusted. And I'll just say this, NPR can be trusted more than most of the domestic news providers. NPR is absolutely better than Fox and MSNBC, probably better than CNN.
I have to agree with you, and I say that as someone who tends to be much more sympathetic to Fox's view of the world than to NPR's. And yet, of the two, if I were to rank them on trustworthiness, I think I'd probably have to give a little bit of an edge to NPR.
Yeah, just getting the facts of the matter right. That's where I'm coming from. Now, their political perspective at NPR is decidedly left-leaning.
Yeah, no question about that.
I don't think there's any doubt about that. I don't think anybody at NPR would even debate that. I've said before that I get my news from NPR, the Christian Science Monitor, some strange places. The BBC gets most of my attention, actually. I think they do the best job of presenting American politics.
This is the way to do it. Get your data, get your information from a bunch of sources, cross-reference them, understanding each one's going to have its own bias.
I think that's right. And I do get some news, I think a fair amount, from Fox. And it's hard to say that you get news from MSNBC because, my God, I don't even know what to say about those. They're so red, they're not even red anymore, right? I do go to them to keep an eye on what the hard left is thinking.
But we get this email about the FBI revision to the data, and I didn't think much of it on the first email until several emails came in, and it occurred to me, maybe we should talk about this, particularly coming from an economics perspective. I'm not at all concerned about data revisions. We do this in economics all the time, and the FBI, I'm sure, was doing it for the same reason that we do it, which is that you got a deadline, you have to come out with these are the latest numbers before everybody has submitted their numbers, and you don't have control over the people who are submitting the numbers. And so, in the case of economics, you hear, whatever it is, the unemployment or GDP growth or what have you, the first number to come out is what's called a preliminary number. And then you'll get an estimated number maybe a month later. And then a couple months later, you'll get a revised number. There's nothing nefarious going on here. It's just more data is coming in, and they're able to update and make the numbers more accurate. And I believe this is what was going on with FBI.
Yeah, and notice we're talking about 2022 data here.
Right, yeah.
It's the end of 2024.
I think they just got 2023 data, but there is no 2024 to be reported yet.
And let me tell you this, do I believe the 2023 data from the FBI? Absolutely I do. They present good crime data. Is the data we're looking at from 2023 going to be the exact same data that we're looking at a year from now from 2023? Not a chance.
Yeah, and so let me put a footnote on your statement that you believe the 2023 data, and I agree with you. But my footnote is I believe it in the sense that I believe this is the most accurate information available at the moment.
At the moment, this is the first cut.
Yeah.
And there's going to be more cuts. When there are, the numbers are going to change. They're not going to change a lot, but they're going to change. The difference between crime being up or down could be the difference of a couple tenths of a percent.
Let me say a couple things about that. One is several people who wrote us got concerned because the FBI numbers do not include all crimes, all murders, what have you, throughout the country.
Let me say that this is a criticism that Donald Trump has been launching for years, and it's correct.
Yeah, and the problem here is that the federal government cannot force state and local governments to submit the data. So they have to rely on voluntary submissions. And what happens here is about 95% of the population is covered by these numbers.
I believe it's 85.
Okay, the numbers I was seeing was 95, but nonetheless, it's, well above 3/4.
Yeah, it literally doesn't matter given what your next point is obviously going to be.
Yeah. My next point is, if the missing data is missing randomly, then it's absolutely not a problem at all. Now, the level of the number is going to be off. So instead of the right answer being 1,000, which is reported, the right answer maybe is 1,200. However, and this is the interesting thing, the changes in the numbers will be accurate if the missing data is random. So if you say, look, the numbers are 10% higher this year than last, that's going to be correct whether there's some missing data or not, provided the missing data is random.
And you can use the data you have to estimate because it will be roughly the same,
right,
almost exactly the same.
Yeah.
You can use that data to estimate very accurately the data that's missing. And then when you get the actual crime data, it's interesting, right? Because it's per 100,000 population.
Mm.
That's how these things are measured. And you get to know how many murders there are per 100,000 population.
Yep.
And those are the numbers we compare year over year. That's what's getting compared. Is there some variance year over year? Yes, there would have to be, given that this is human behavior. How much variance and what does the trend look like? Those are the questions to ask.
Yeah, there's going to be variation from year to year for two reasons. One is different people will not submit data this year versus last year. There's transcription errors, what have you, all kinds of errors like that. And also there's going to be some fundamental change that fundamentally there's more or less crime this year than last year. And because of that, these numbers will fluctuate. But here's the thing. The people who were getting concerned were taking issue with you saying that crime had declined because, and I'm going to quote the homicide numbers had said there was almost 1,400 fewer murders in 2022 versus 2021. That got revised to a 1,700 murder increase, 2021 to 2022. So people point to that and said, look, this is big change in the data. And it turns out it's not that big of a change, actually. The crime rate, again, I'll stick with murder because those are the numbers that I have in front of me, and they tend to be the most clear numbers. The murder rate in this country has been pretty consistent since 2004. Now, it fluctuates up and down a bit, but it tends to fluctuate up and down a bit by what statistically we call noise. And here's the important question. This data revision that we saw from a decline of 1,400 murders to a revision that shows us a plus 1,700 murders, that difference, whatever that is, over 3,000, is that difference larger than the normal year-to-year noise that you get? And the answer is no, it's not. In other words, the regular fluctuations in murder rates from year to year are larger than this data revision.
That would make sense intellectually once you stop listening to politicians and start just thinking. Ask yourself, all right, a shift of 3,000 murders in the data in a country of 350 million people.
Right.
It's not even going to show up in the data of murder per 100,000.
Yeah, it's vanishingly small.
It's not even going to be a 0.01% difference.
That cuts both ways. On the one hand, I can point to it and say, okay, yes, there was this data revision, but it's small enough that it's indistinguishable from background noise. But then on the other hand, Harris and Biden's supporters were pointing to the decline, had originally said in the data back in 2021 to 22, pointing to that and saying, see how wonderful we are under our administration, there was a decline. But let me tell you, that decline, the revision is less than the background noise. That decline they were pointing to was half the size of this revision. So it's complete randomness. It has nothing to do with the administration or anything else.
And when politicians from either side, given this data, grab at it and say, see, there's nothing to see.
Right.
Now, having said that, if we go back to 1993 and map out violent crime from 93 to 2004,
right,
what you end up seeing there is a precipitous decline.
Yes.
All of our violent crime disappeared in the period 1993 to 2004. Why is that? I literally have no idea. I can tell you, interestingly, that assault weapons had nothing to do with it. I feel dirty even using the phrase assault weapon because it's a phrase without any meaning. But the assault weapons ban sunsetted out during that period when violent crime was on the downturn. And even when people could go out and buy assault weapons again, crime kept right on going down. We covered this in Cooperation and Coercion. So what accounts for it? I have no idea. This is Bill Clinton onward, right? If you want to remember it in political history.
And this is the thing to keep in mind with any kind of data like this. There are so many things that are causing the data. To point to one thing and say this is the answer is just complete ludicrous. And you see this day after day. Anytime the stock market is up or down, people point and say, oh, it's because of this news, this thing that some politician said, or this company had earnings that were up or down, or whatever it is. It's none of it. It's noise. It's randomness. It's due to hundreds of thousands of different factors.
So, in the end, what do we think of the FBI data? I think it's the gold standard for crime data. I don't think anything else even comes close.
I think so too. I think it's flawed, but it's as good as I think we're going to get given the circumstances.
These are human things. It doesn't mean it's not the gold standard. Look, and there's one other way that actually is used to get crime stats, and that's a random poll. This happens month after month after month too. So what do you prefer? A randomized poll that might get 2,000 people? Or something that covers 85% of the United States and extrapolates the rest from that?
Yeah.
The 85%, I mean, this is a no-brainer. What was the FBI actually guilty of here? Because the claim was, oh, sure, look what happens. They come out after the presidential debate. And actually, they didn't even say anything. They just threw the updated data on their website and called it good. That's what they're guilty of. That they didn't make an announcement of some kind.
Right, but they typically don't make an announcement. They just put the updated data. People understand the data gets updated periodically.
That's right, but a bunch of people every 4 years care about the data. The day after Election Day, cease caring about it for 3.5 more years. And that's where we are. And if you ask yourself, wherever you happen to live in the United States, how much crime are you seeing? I'd hazard to guess the answer is almost none, no matter where you live. There's a few places where it's not going to be almost none.
Now, I'm sure you're hearing about it on the news.
That's not what I asked. I asked how much you see.
Right.
Have you been victimized? I don't take human behavior for granted. I take steps when I go out to remain safe, right? There are all kinds of things I don't do. I don't leave my car unlocked. I don't leave my house unlocked. I don't walk down certain streets. That doesn't mean I'm not living in a safe environment. It means I know that certain things are to be done to enhance my safety.
All this email about the FBI came across our desk, and a couple days later, somebody wrote me and said, look at the polling data. Trump is up by 2 percentage points over Harris. Therefore, Trump's going to win the election. And I was fresh off of looking at this FBI data, and I said to this person, well, hang on. Because if you look at the polling results, they're done periodically as we get closer to the election. They're coming up like every week or every couple days now. But if you look at these polling results and ask yourself, how do they change 1 week to the next? And it turns out they change enough that a 2 percentage point lead, which is what Trump had as of this last poll, is in the noise. The randomness is larger than that. In fact, I ran some numbers, and according to what I'm seeing, for you to be able to say this candidate clearly has a lead to the extent that this candidate is likely going to win the election, given the poll numbers, given what I've seen, that candidate's got to be at least 5 percentage points above the other one. That's how large the lead has to be to become distinguishable from just background randomness.
And I've heard, I think, credible reports from inside both campaigns that the people running the campaigns on both campaigns are terrified right now at their internal numbers.
James, I've been thinking about this, and I want your opinion. I've been thinking if I were running a campaign and I need to behave strategically, and that is I need to get my base out voting. I don't want polls that show definitively my candidate's going to win, because my base will tend to stay home. We've got this in the bag. I don't need to go out.
You also don't want polls that show your candidate is all that far behind.
Right. For the same reason. What's the point of my going out? So it's as if there's this incentive on the part of the candidates for the polls to come out just razor thin, 50-50. So everybody thinks, oh, my vote's going to matter here.
I hate to break it to you. Your vote's not going to matter. I live in a swing state. My vote's not going to matter. Most people don't live in swing states. There are only 8 or so of them. In the end, those are the only states that matter at all. And one vote in any of those states is irrelevant.
I used to do an exercise with my introductory statistics students, asking them, if we selected voters randomly, how many would we need to poll to get the right answer? In other words, to have that group of voters elect the same person that the entire population would elect if the entire population voted. And the answer, strangely, is very small. It's around 500,000, 200,000, in that range. That's all you need, provided you select them randomly. Ask them, who do you want? And you're going to get the right answer.
People always complain. The political class people always complain when they look at the voting returns and they say, but only half of the population voted. Imagine what would have been possible. And what would have been possible is that twice as many people would have voted and you would have gotten exactly the same outcome.
Yes, that's correct.
The people who don't vote hold almost to the same opinion of the people who do vote. There's been study after study after study on this. And to a political scientist, I don't think anybody would ever claim otherwise. And yet you get this breathless reporting after every election that, oh my God, if people had just voted.
The only time that's not the case is when there's some systemic reason. For example, on voting night, it was snowy. So the elderly are going to tend not to come out. And if the elderly tend to vote in one direction, now all of a sudden it does make a difference.
And even that disappears when you look at the entire country. Maybe if the power grid went down, we could make that kind of argument, right? But, anything short of that, you're going to get the same result past half the population, no matter how many more people show up to vote. These are just the vagaries of statistics. And you and I try to be very honest about statistics because, political people lie about them all the time. That's what they do. That's their stock in trade, right? Find an argument deep in these statistics to offer that will get people frothing at the mouth. We try very hard not to do that and just tell you what we know about statistics and then kind of go about our business.
Well, I'm glad you said that because I'd forgotten. I've got a note here. Here's an example. The thing I'm about to tell you is correct. It's not a lie, but it's going to make you imagine a lie. And here's the statement. The violent crime rate in 2022 rose 27% versus 2021. And the way you interpret it is violent crime was 27% higher in 2022. That's not what I said. I said the violent crime rate rose 27%. That is, it went from 1 per 100 people to 1.25 per 100 people. Yes, it's a 27% increase, but it's a 27% increase on a number that is so incredibly small that 27% isn't that much.
What was it in 1993?
I do not know the answer to that, but I think I wouldn't be surprised if it was up in the 8 or 9 range.
I believe it was in the mid-8s.
Yeah.
That's the kind of decline that we've seen.
Yeah.
So after you're done with that kind of decline, what you should expect to see is a leveling out, which is exactly what we got from 2004 forward.
And remember, it can't go below 0. So the lower it gets, the harder it is for it to get any lower still.
And now, random statistical noise looks like gigantic increases or decreases.
Yeah.
And it's not that. You can't have a giant decrease in crime from where we are. It's not possible. We're so low on violent crime now that you cannot have a gigantic decrease. So every time a politician says, we're going to get crime down, no, they're not. Bunch of liars. And that's all the time we've got this week on Words and Numbers. Until next time,
send us email, wordsandnumberspodcast@gmail.com.
Try to be nice to one person who doesn't deserve it. Till next week, can't take it easy.
See you next week, James.